I didn't forget about Big Brother. It's just that it takes quite a lot longer to watch a season of Big Brother than Survivor. Anyways, Big Brother 3 is a lot better than Big Brother 2 in a lot of ways. The strategy was a lot more complex, and in my opinion, the competitions were a lot more complicated. Last season, we literally had them throwing compact discs into the pool for reward, and this season, we had just about every competition you could think of. That being said, this video is going to be a very hard one to make, as I've been watching this season for months, and recalling all the strategy and moves is going to take a lot. Anyways, let's get into it. Of course, she's at last. She's the first boot, and a pretty forgettable first boot at that. She went out at the beginning of the season where people were still sort of voted out for personal reasons other than strategic. I guess she just rubbed some people the wrong way, especially with that hand-washing fiasco with Jerry and Danielle. I'm a little surprised that she went even with all that in mind, considering she went into the eviction on the block with Amy, who seemed to annoy more people than her. Still not really sure why she went home here, but the fact of the matter is that she was barely seen, and I will admit it was a little annoying in the house. Honestly, Tanya isn't any better than Lori. She was surprisingly shown even less, and the house wasn't too fond of her either. In my mind, she's most memorable for having a fight with Amy shortly before she was evicted. And speaking of which, Tanya was voted out second, and like Lori, she was nominated as a pawn against Josh, who was starting to annoy people. It seems like half the cast was annoying each other this season or something. Once again, the pawn went home, and I can only imagine this is because Josh had more ties with the rest of the house. I mean, he technically was part of a 6-person alliance, so it was in a lot of players' better interests to keep him over Tanya. The saddest thing about Eric's elimination is that the whole twist with the veto was that the HOH didn't have ultimate power over every week, and a huge alliance couldn't just be collapsed by one person. Because before this, the people that were nominated initially were the ones still on the block at eviction night, but no longer. Yet, this is exactly what happened in week 4. Eric was doing relatively well. It seemed like he would be in it for the long haul, and then Jerry won HOH. He nominates Eric and Lisa as they were in the early stages of a showmance, and then Kiara betrays the two by not using the veto on either of them. And I guess actually they were actually in a showmance by then, not really early stages. They were like making out, so yeah, they were a showmance. So Kiara doesn't use the veto on either of them, and which was a huge deal, and that leads Eric to be voted out. With Jerry as the tie-breaking vote, as he was more of a physical threat than Lisa was. So, I mean, I guess his elimination is less of a testament to how the veto failed at balancing the power between the HOH and the House, and more of a testament to how alliance flipping is more common than some people may realize. Yet the biggest blindside that happened was arguably when Lisa, his own showmance, chose not to vote him back into the House over Amy, which I'm pretty sure she was also the deciding vote as well. And later on, she did say that her reasoning behind not sending him in is because she knew that she would just have to say goodbye to him again if he comes back. So she would rather have lost him for good, at least in the house, instead of have to lose him again. Jerry was supposed to be the sort of player we'd seen in Chicken George and Kent of the past seasons, but he was a lot different. He seemed to be more articulate than them, and he was definitely more friendly than Kent was. That being said, he had some serious hygiene issues, namely not washing his hands after using the bathroom. Besides that, he goes down in history as the first Big Brother contestant to hold the power of veto, and also the first contestant to use it on a nominee, which he uses on Marcellus in probably the most cringy veto ceremony I've ever seen, in which he goes on a melodramatic speech about how he misjudged Marcellus's personality and playing style, and just got it very dramatic for something as ultimately unimportant as a TV game show. Going forward from that, he was never really the target, sort of like Kent, except he wasn't really part of any real alliances either, except for the one that he was in week 1 when he betrayed their plan by saving Marcellus, so he wasn't really around for that. He just sort of sat back and watched the alliances that formed at the beginning of the season cannibalize themselves until the remaining players were content with each other and reached to get out Jerry. Looking back, I kinda just saw him as a goofy player, and not a very good player at that. If we look back at the older man player type that we'd seen so far, Kent was a far better strategic player in my mind because he was actually loyal to his alliances, and with Chicken George, it's kind of incomparable. It was a different game back then, and his personality just resonated well with America, and it's shown by how long he lasted. Basically, Jerry wasn't as likable or well strategized as the other sort of players who came before him. I will admit that Kiara was a very good player. She was well liked in the house and played a good strategic game, but I still don't understand why she didn't use the veto week 4, because depending on who Jerry put up as a replacement, Kiara and Roddy would have kept both of their alliance members and would probably continue to dominate the game. Instead, she lost a number, and in week 6, Amy re-entered the house, who was one of Kiara's biggest enemies. Amy also went on to win Head of Household and nominated Kiara and her boy toy Roddy. Jerry wins the second veto, once again making Big Brother history as the first person to win 2 vetoes. He obviously doesn't use the veto here, sending Kiara home and now breaking up the last remaining showmance in the house. And honestly, I think if I was in the house, I would have voted for Roddy here, however, because he was a much bigger physical and strategic threat, and honestly, if Kiara made it to Final 2, I don't see her winning up against most of the remaining players, save for, like, Amy or Jerry. Let's face it, Amy was never going to win Big Brother 3, but she was very entertaining to watch. Night 1, she made a very bad impression on the house by getting drunk and making a huge dent in the beers the house had, and she was always being targeted. She initially got voted out in Week 3, but was voted back in over Eric in Week 6. Here she reunites with her number 1 ally in Marcellus, but also makes stronger bonds with people like Danielle, Jason, and Lisa. With all that in mind, she was still nominated very often, even though once again, there was always a bigger target in the house. And also with the Final 5, an insanely dumb move on Marcellus's part keeps her safe one more week. Then at the Final 4 HOH, Danielle nominates the women and leaves it up to Jason to make the sole decision, as there was no veto at the Final 4 in Big Brother 3, and this week was hilarious as Lisa and Amy desperately vie for Jason's mercy. Amy was sadly voted out here, which is dumb because Danielle and Jason were working together the entire time, and if they took Amy to the Final 3, they would have easily made it to the end together, and even if by some chance Amy does win the final Head of Household, either of them would easily win against her. So in a way, Amy was sort of the Will of this season, in the sense that she was on the block so many times, actually more times than Will was, I'm pretty sure. And that being said, she was a lot more likable than Will was, too. I know, shocker, right? Well, you have to remember that this is my personal ranking. This is primarily a ranking of the cast from my least favorite to favorite, with their gameplay slightly influencing my ranking. With all that in mind, Lisa's actually a pretty good winner. I mean, she played arguably a better social game than Danielle, and was also more scrappy. There are times where she or one of her allies were in danger, so she had to fight harder than Danielle to get where she was. The jury made note that she was very lucky to make it as far as she did, and in a way I get that, because Eric, Kiara, and Roddy all went way before her, but I think she didn't just make it as far as she did by pure circumstance. No finalist ever makes it to the end on accident. She didn't go right after Roddy did because she was beginning to work with Danielle and Jason more, and out of the 4 of her alliance, she was arguably the most likable. She didn't make it to the Final 3 by luck. She made it to the Final 3 because Jason was stupid and voted to evict Amy. Did Lisa win the final Head of Household because the stars in the sky aligned just perfectly for her? Of course not. The 2 comps she played in that HOH were one of endurance and one of memory, and she earned that final Head of Household. At the Final 2, the jury sort of perceived Danielle as the evil player, and I valued Lisa's more amicable social gameplay. So yeah, Lisa was an okay winner. Dare I say even an underrated winner. And she's not an unlikable person, it's just that she's not as present as a winner as others, and I was just sort of indifferent to her as a player, and had she not won, I'd be even more indifferent. I don't think anyone else would put Josh over Lisa, so I had to sort of stop at number 5 for Josh. Josh was very annoying at first, but like BB19 Josh, over time his annoying qualities turned into what made him a hilarious player to watch. And sure, he may have been evicted only week 5 as opposed to the other Josh winning the entire game, but at first he was shaping up to be a sort of second coming of Will, in the sense that he was a pest that people wanted out ASAP, but every week he found himself safe again in some way. I mean, he wasn't even nominated all that much, and the house actually started to love him a little. Of course, once he was finally nominated for the last time, his anxiety and paranoia drove him nuts, and the house realized that they did want him gone, but they still loved him quite a lot. Basically, he had a short rags to riches story, pushing the definition of riches, as even though he was an okay player, he never really stood a chance to win the game. Now this was a rags to riches story. He was nominated week 1 as a target because of his standoffishness, but was saved with the veto, and after winning the following Head of Household, he definitely came out of his shell. He seemed to not be targeted at all for a while, despite being directly associated with Amy, as he was her only true ally for a while, and once she was first evicted, he once again did not suffer at all because he was playing a great social game. He was so likable that nobody wanted him out. It also helped that he was outside of the main alliances that started to turn on each other at this point. Then things only got better for him when Amy returned, and they sort of teamed up with Danielle and Jason. Then at the Final 5, things started to get a little shaky for him as expected, because it's getting down to the wire. He couldn't stay completely safe the entire time, as no one could. Well, he's nominated with Amy by Jason, as him and Danielle were closer with Lisa, and Marcellus has the golden opportunity to save himself at the very least when he wins the coveted golden power veto, which at this time in Big Brother the standard veto was the silver power veto, which only allows a non-nominee to take someone off. So if you were nominated and won the silver veto, veto, you couldn't take yourself off. But what does Marcellus do? He doesn't use it at all. If you weren't going to use it on yourself, at the very least use it on Amy to keep her safe. But of course, he gets evicted with Jason casting the tie-breaking vote. I feel like Marcellus was playing one of the best social games we had seen at this point in Big Brother, but no matter what scenario I cook up in my mind, it doesn't look like he makes it that far beyond this. His best bet was to obviously use it on himself, and which would guarantee Amy would go, and then he would have to win the next HOH, and if not, it would be over for him. I feel like Roddy was greatly misunderstood. He was a really nice and logical guy, but he was always perceived as being snake-like and sly. I mean, Danielle referred to him as the devil multiple times. I think the reason he outlived Eric and Kiara was because he played a far better social game than them, as he had more bonds with the other players. And really, it's his social game that makes him a severely underrated player. That being said, once Kiara went, the odds were seriously against him, and at the final 6, there was no way he was staying in that house unless he won veto, which he didn't. I feel like he was a particularly bitter juror because of, once again, how his housemates perceived him as not just a player, but a person, when he was just a cool dude. He was one of the smartest players I've ever watched, just from a knowledge standpoint, and I don't really see any flaws in his gameplay all that much. If he was able to make it to the end, I think it would have been the same effect we saw with Chris in Survivor Vanuatu, where no matter how he played the game, the fact that he got there against the odds was enough to warrant a win. So with all that in mind, the fact that he finished in 6th place is actually okay. He still had a good run, but the next 2 players on this list dominated the house from beginning to end. Before you get out your pitchforks, once again, this is my personal view on these players, and most people would put Danielle at first. And while I don't necessarily think Danielle is overrated at all, she's not my favorite person in this cast. She's my second favorite, but she's not my first favorite. Even though it could be seen as evil or villainous, she played easily the best game out of anyone in this cast, in the sense that nobody saw her coming. In her own words, she was innocent as a dove, sly like a snake. She even admitted to lying to basically everyone in the house besides Jason, and it was that secretly cutthroat gameplay that lost her the $500,000 in the end. And I knew that Lisa won going into the season because I'm a loser, but still, I did not expect Danielle to lose 9-1 to Lisa. Holy cow. But still, I would vote for her over Lisa. Danielle was awesome. I love how after every eviction, she would say in the confessionals, blank down, blank to go, as in how many players had been evicted and how many players were left before she would make it to the final 2. It really showed the drive she had. She just played a little bit too hard and a little bit too mercilessly. At least her strategy to pick one person and take them to the end was not only somewhat successful for her, but was adopted by other players who ended up winning the entire thing because of it. Also, another side note that I learned this after after writing the script, and I don't know if this is like a theory or just stone cold truth, but actually, after this season, in Big Brother 2 and 3, if you've been evicted, you could go into the regular world, but after season 3, if you had been evicted, whether you were a pre-juror or a juror, you had to be sequestered. At the very least, if you were a juror, you had to be sequestered, and the reason because of that is, in this season, all the jurors got to go home and watch the show as it happened, because all the cast members were jurors who had been evicted, and basically, the production gave Danielle kind of a bad edit. They kind of edited her, in that way to make her seem really evil and malicious. And because of that, they had like a negative feeling towards Danielle, and that's why they voted against her. And people thought that was unfair, so they changed the rules of Big Brother after that. Sure, maybe Jason was Danielle's sidekick, so to speak, but he actually did a lot of her dirty work, so he deserves way more credit than he gets. I mean, he won 2 head of households. How many did Danielle win? Like 1, exactly. He played the best social game, I'd say, because even though he was a physical threat, he was just so likable and had a sort of naive personality that nobody ever targeted him. Nobody in that house looked at sweet young Jason and went, yeah, I want you out. I don't think there was actually a single person who disliked him. Sure, in the final head of household challenge, we did see some people did have some negative things to say about him, but I don't think that meant that they disliked him. He immediately made an interesting impression on me, as the first thing we ever hear him say is that he's basically playing this game for God. Jeez, talk about high stakes. Well, he almost got to the end for the man upstairs, making it to the final 3, having never been nominated once, barely even targeted once. And had he won the final HOH, especially looking at what actually went down in reality, I think Jason stood a great chance to win over Danielle. I mean, if the jury favored Lisa's social game over Danielle's strategic game, then they would obviously pick Jason over Danielle. As easily one of the most underrated players of the classic age of Big Brother, Jason was this close to winning it all, and it's a crime that he hasn't come back, which I say that for like a lot of players, Big Brother and Survivor alike. So maybe I should just that should be a video, honestly, to like draft or like speculate on like what would be a cool second chance season for either Big Brother or Survivor. I know Survivor's already done a second chance, but literally everyone in the Survivor fandom wants a second chance too, me included. So anyways, this video is done, and it's kind of long, and it was really hard to make, not in the sense that like had to get all that information out, but there was a lot of glitches. Some videos, like some clips wouldn't show up, so this video took way longer than I thought it would to make. But anyways, I got it done. I'm over that. We're good. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. I will see you later for the next video, which I'm not even sure what it is, because there's a chance that I might be done with Survivor Guatemala by then. So who knows? I don't know. See you in the next one. Like, comment, subscribe.